Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of June the 28th and 29th, 2025. And one thing I do want to talk about in this video is Zohran Mamdani. Zohran Mamdani was a candidate in the recent Democratic primaries for the mayor of New York, and he did very well. He got the highest number of votes, and it does seem there's a very good chance that in the general election in November, I think it's November the 4th, he will be elected mayor of New York. I mean, it's not a sure thing. The betting market, I think, suggests that right now he's got something like a 74% chance of being elected. So, things could still go wrong. But he's certainly getting a lot of attention, Zohran Mamdani, because, he puts himself up as a democratic socialist. So you're going to get a democratic socialist candidate potentially becoming mayor of New York. Of course, there are quite a lot of democratic socialists in the United States. I don't think that should be seen as being especially surprising, but still, some people on the right are very concerned about this. So I thought it might be a good idea to look at Zohran Mamdani's horoscope, especially as we do have a time of birth for him. Say what you like about Zohran Mamdani, but at least one's got the ability to look at his chart and to kind of evaluate, what kind of person he is. But before I look at Zohran Mamdani, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend. And yes, it's the weekend of June 28th and 29th, 2025. So here is the chart of the weekend. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So here is the chart for midnight on Sunday. And so midnight on Sunday, we have the moon at 25 degrees Leo. So for pretty much all of the weekend, the moon will be in Leo. I mean, not the whole weekend, but of course it does depend where you are. But with the moon in Leo, it's quite a fiery weekend. Moon in Leo, Mercury in Leo, and we have got what else? We've got Saturn in Aries, and so what's going on? So Mercury on Saturday is making a trine to Saturn and a trine to Neptune. So for many of us, that might be an opportunity to get ourselves together and maybe to confront some of our concerns, because we do have Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and Saturn-Neptune conjunction can be about fears and all the things that might be bothering us, and some of our fears might be unreal. We might just be over-concerned, and perhaps with Mercury trine Saturn and Neptune, we can look at things in a new way and perhaps realize that some of our concerns are just not real, and we can just sort of get on with things and perhaps enjoy ourselves. And the moon on Sunday does start making an aspect to Venus, moon square Venus. Now that moon square Venus, you could say, is perhaps indulgent. Moon in Leo likes attention. Venus in Taurus can enjoy the good things in life. So that might be something we need to be aware of with that aspect, and we shouldn't be too concerned about showing off, and we don't have to spend money or indulge in over-the-top behavior to be appreciated. And additionally, the moon does make a square to Uranus. So that moon square Uranus, just before the moon leaves Virgo, makes that square to Uranus. So that could cause something unexpected, but it's a short-moving aspect, so there's no need to worry too much about it. And then we've got an opposition between Mercury and Pluto. So, Mercury is in, early Leo, making that opposition to Pluto. And you could say that is probably the most important aspect of the weekend, the opposition. Yeah, I know that Mercury is trine Saturn and Neptune, but oppositions tend to be more powerful than trines, and Mercury opposition Pluto, that could be about mental struggle. Not necessarily overly stressful mental struggle, but we're trying to get our heads around something, and we're not quite sure what to say, whether we should say anything. That is always the issue with Pluto. Does Pluto bring things to the surface in a dramatic and unexpected way, or does it hide things? And very often it can. And with Mercury opposition Pluto, we might have powerful thoughts, and we might think, well, we don't really want to tell other people what we're thinking. Now is not the time. Though there's another way of looking at Mercury opposition Pluto, and it can be about the way we use words and the way other people use words. And words can be used to twist and manipulate. So if you want to be manipulative, you can be, but on the other hand, watch out for what other people are doing and what other people are saying, because people want to have control, and they perhaps might want to use words to assert their control. And additionally, the moon does move into Virgo on Sunday. I make it that London time, it moves into Virgo at 12:43 on Sunday. So moon moving into Virgo, it does bring a change. Let me make absolutely sure I've got that right. So moon moves into Virgo on June the 29th at 12:43. So in fact, let me correct myself. I said that the moon is going to be in Virgo all weekend. Well, if you are, in the Americas, then the moon will move into Virgo on Sunday morning. And if you're in the UK and Europe, then it's early afternoon on Sunday, the moon will make the shift. And it is quite an important shift. Suddenly we have the moon in the same sign as Mars, and with moon in Virgo, Mars in Virgo, then suddenly there are things that need to be attended to of a material nature. So when the moon moves into Virgo, it's quite possible that there is a shift. So that's the picture for New York, and let's just look at Sydney, Australia, to give an alternative view. And so if you're in Sydney, this is a chart for the middle of a weekend, midnight on Sunday. The moon is at 18 Leo. So if you are in Sydney, Australia, certainly the moon is going to be in Leo for pretty much the whole weekend. That is true. But aside from that, well, those squares certainly the square between Moon and Uranus may not be such a feature of your weekend as it would, for example, be in the US. And then there is the heliocentric chart. Here it is, and we have the Earth now getting very close to the square of Mars. So this is a chart for sort of midnight on Sunday, and so I think that we're going to be feeling that Earth square Mars. Earth square Mars can really stir things up, and people on Earth, us down here on Earth, trying to assert ourselves, or maybe realizing that other people are trying to assert ourselves, and issues of control and authority might be important. And also notice that Venus is making a quincunx to Mars. Venus at 8 degrees 52 Pisces, making a quincunx to Mars at 8:50 Libra. So when you see a heliocentric Venus-Mars aspect, whatever its nature, it is about someone trying to be charming, maybe trying trying to influence hearts and minds. Are they being successful with a quincunx? Yeah, not necessarily. And perhaps what we have to do is distinguish between Earth square Mars and Earth sextile Venus. Two very different aspects, but they are sort of connected. And Earth square Venus is about being charming, getting people to like us, whereas Earth square Mars is about conflict. And so things can switch very quickly. And, it's tempting to assume a conflict with Earth square Mars, but maybe we should try to tune into Earth sextile Venus. And, maybe there is a way of getting people to like us and also perhaps getting our way. But we don't have to, always assume an argument, assume a conflict. There can be a way of smoothing things over, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Venus is quincunx Mars, and so Venus quincunx Mars attempts to be attractive and charismatic can backfire, and there can be a clumsiness there. So don't try too hard to get people to like you. Don't try too hard to attract, because you might actually find yourself doing the opposite. But it's not your problem. It's not any of our problems. It's just the fact that there is Venus quincunx Mars in the sky heliocentrically. So you could say there's not a huge amount to report heliocentrically, apart from that really the Earth square Mars is the important aspect, and that's something I've been talking about over the last few days. And I think now I should just look at what's going on for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of June the 28th and 29th, 2025. Aries, you should have a pretty good weekend. You're on good form. You know how to enjoy yourself. And, I think that you're going to come over as a reasonably powerful person. And I think in most cases, you're going to be able to get your way. And you will have a sense of fun. And, people want a sense of fun. And, your sense of humor is going to be on good form. And it's a sense of humor that, okay, maybe not everyone is going to appreciate or understand it, but does that matter? As an Aries, you're not someone who generally regards life as one big popularity contest. Those that like you are, really going to like you. And from a heliocentric view, Mars is making a square to the Earth, and Mars, your ruler, making a square to Earth. That really does emphasize the point that, yeah, you can't be everyone's friend, and some people will not appreciate what you do, and not appreciate what you say, but that really shouldn't bother you. And this weekend, you can pretty much feel free to do what you want, and just put the emphasis on enjoyment, and also doing things that you're good at. Don't waste time doing something that you can kind of do okay on. Yeah, you might do okay on it, but it would be a waste, because there are things that you do really, really well, and most importantly, things that you enjoy doing really, really well. And so if you can focus on them, then I think that things are going to be absolutely fine, and you're going to really make a powerful impression. And additionally, don't worry about being somewhat focused. Yes, you want to have fun, but ideally you want to have fun but also create something for the future. You want to create some kind of permanence. And so if you're with people, or if you're talking to people and you're having fun with people, maybe you want something to continue, for example, beyond the weekend. And I think that that's something you can do. So if you're enjoying yourself. Think about next week. Think about what needs to be organized next week. Just think ahead, and don't allow the present to slip into the past. I think that is important. So if the present is really working for you, the present is so fragile, isn't it? You're enjoying the moment and then it goes. And so perhaps what you need to do as Aries, is find a way of actually holding on to the present. And that might actually need some organization, and that might become clearer, by the end of a weekend, because, on Sunday, the moon does change sign. It moves from a Leo to Virgo. So when the moon moves into Virgo, it starts making a conjunction to Mars, and your priorities and your emphasis might change. So while it is a weekend, Aries, that I think is very spontaneous, that things can really move, and you can have a lot of freedom, and you can do what's important to you. There just might come a stage where you have to take everything that you've created and start to sort it out. Again, it's asking yourself, how do you take something that's working in the present and project it into the future? And that does require some work, and it does require some organization. And, you might have to do things, say things which may not always make you popular. But again, it's not a popularity contest. And, don't forget what I said about the Earth making a square to Mars. In the end, you might have to be decisive, and you might have to say things, do things which get some opposition. But, I don't think that can be helped. But I also don't think it's a problem. And so, it's a weekend that for you is, it looks like it being a good weekend. I'm not saying it's going to be an absolutely spectacular weekend, but, do try to live in the present, and do try to use what you have, and don't lose it. And if something is working for you and you really feel that it's working, then ask yourself, what do you need to do to make sure that you can keep going with it, but to make sure that it continues to work in the future. Taurus, it really should be a weekend, ideally. Now, when I say it should be a weekend, I'm saying that, well, the weekend is a time which is different, where you perhaps separate yourself out from the issues of work and responsibility and having to be out there in the world. And even if you're not working, it has this supposed specialness that society has given this concept of a weekend. And this weekend, with the moon moving through Leo for most of the weekend, perhaps even all the weekend, if you're in New Zealand, for example, this weekend, should be special, and it should be separate. And I do think that there are things you need to do that relate to yourself and your own needs, and the fewer obligations you have over the weekend, the better. So don't feel that there's anything that you have to do. And also, with Venus moving through Taurus, Venus is still moving through Taurus. That's something you need to enjoy, and so perhaps you can luxuriate to some extent. And it's not a waste of time luxuriating, because you are recharging your batteries, and that is a good thing to do. And we've got the moon in Leo making a square to Venus in Taurus, and so with that aspect, you might really feel that there's something you just want to do that you really enjoy, that doesn't require any pressure, and it could well be good for your health and good for your sanity. Yet Mercury is making an opposition to Pluto. In fact, you could say that Mercury opposition Pluto is the main aspect of the weekend. And this aspect between Mercury and Pluto could be difficult because it might represent pressure. And Pluto has been moving through Aquarius for some time, and of course it will stay in Aquarius for the next couple of decades, until the 2040s, I think. And so with Mercury opposition Pluto, something out there is bothering you, or is trying to bother you, and is perhaps demanding your attention, wants your attention, and is perhaps trying to sort of play power games with you. And part of you might want to give into it because it's easier that way. But I don't think you have to. I think you can hold your ground. It's only a couple of days while the moon is moving through Leo, and there are things you want to do. You need to relax in a very deep kind of way. And so if there is pressure from outside, I think in most cases it can be ignored. Now, the weekend does change when the moon moves into Virgo. So the moon moves into Virgo, well, it depends where you are. I mean, Sunday morning it could move into Virgo if you're in the Americas. So lunchtime in Europe, sort of much later in the day in Australasia, perhaps towards midnight. But when the moon moves into Virgo, possibly things become easier, and you may become aware of new opportunities, and there may be things that you're able to do, perhaps because you feel better, you feel more comfortable, and you feel more confident. And so by the end of Sunday, you can start to expand the theatre of operations, and you can do new stuff, and you may find ways of enjoying yourself actually in new ways, because normally, isn't it, with a weekend, Saturday is sort of a more exciting day than Sunday. But actually, I think in your case, Sunday, particularly late on Sunday, should actually be more interesting. There's more going on at this time. So perhaps if you feel that you must do something, if you must interact, do focus on Sunday rather than Saturday. And when the moon moves into Virgo, it does make a conjunction to Mars, and that Moon-Mars conjunction could actually be quite exciting, and you may be able to enjoy other people's company. And if you want to meet people, especially meet new people, then probably you should focus your social activities on right at the end of the weekend, and that will be a time when you're feeling better, when you're feeling more confident. But still, for the whole weekend, don't allow yourself to be pressurized, because it would be unnecessary. And if you think that something is important and you want to look after yourself, then do what feels right. Gemini, the main aspect this weekend is probably an opposition between Mercury and Pluto. I mean, Mercury does make other aspects. It makes a trine to Saturn. It makes a trine to Neptune. So you might actually regard those aspects as part of a broader complex. Mercury making aspects to outer planets, which are Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto, and that does mean that there are things you need to do, and things you need to say. And with Mercury making a trine to Saturn, then do think about how you are communicating, and also the broad impression you are giving. You can speak with great power and conviction. You don't have to say a lot, but you just have to speak with confidence. And when you speak with confidence, then people will listen, and you can use your words to create actual effects, to create structure. Mercury trine Saturn. And so if you happen to be socializing over the weekend, which you might be, wouldn't be such a bad thing to do. It's not necessarily a casual process. It's not something you just do in a random kind of way. Ideally, you will do it with purpose, and you'll be thinking about the kind of impression you want to have. And I think that you actually can have that impression. And then you've got Mercury opposition Pluto, and with Mercury opposition Pluto, that indicates to me that you are able to communicate with power. Your words will carry great weight. I mean, that's something you can do, although Mercury opposition Pluto might additionally indicate, or rather alternatively indicate, that something is holding you back. This is a problem with Pluto. Pluto does have this contradictory meaning. Does it intensify, or does it frighten? Does it overwhelm? And ideally, you don't want Pluto to be an overwhelming force, but it could be. You might feel that there are things out there that you don't fully understand, that are just so much larger than yourself, so much more powerful than you, that you really can't say anything, and you may find yourself being silent because you've got plenty to say, but you're just afraid of the reaction. So if you do find yourself over the weekend being concerned and feeling that you're out of your depth, don't panic. It may just be a challenge. And if you have the courage to say what's on your mind, then I think actually, Gemini, you're going to be pleased with the results, and you can really have a powerful impact. And you are, in many respects at the moment, in tune with what is happening around you. You understand the world. You understand what needs to be done. And if you're able to articulate this understanding, then I think that it will be appreciated, and you'll be able to really make an impact. And so for much of a weekend, you should be thinking about what needs to be said, and also where you need to go. There are places to go, I think, and if there are invitations, especially on Saturday, then I think you should avail yourself of those invitations, and perhaps go from place to place. So by the end of a weekend, as the moon moves from Leo to Virgo, you might want to slow down. When the moon moves into Virgo, you perhaps start to realize that you've got limited amounts of energy, that perhaps you've exhausted yourself, and you have you've done your best, and you don't have to do any more. That Mercury opposition Pluto can be an exhausting aspect. It can be a very empowering aspect, but once you've used it, once you've expended it, once you've done your absolute best to make an impact, you might feel that there's just nothing left. And so by the end of Sunday, perhaps it's best to retreat, at least in a temporary way. Cancer. It may not be an entirely relaxing weekend. There could be things just bothering you. You'd prefer it if they didn't bother you, but somehow they can't be avoided, and maybe it's just things carrying on from earlier in the week, perhaps just small things to consider, and also financial matters may be hard to avoid. You're thinking about money, and even if you don't want to, and you perhaps realize that everything has a financial consequence, or at least everything seems to have a financial consequence. And one aspect we've got over the weekend is an opposition aspect between Mercury and Pluto, and this Mercury opposition Pluto could be somewhat obsessive. Once you start thinking about something, it is difficult to stop. And what you could be thinking about is money. So that is something that you do have to be aware of. Now, so far I've been sort of rather negative. I've suggested that it's not necessarily desirable to be overly concerned about things like money, but there are advantages, and you shouldn't forget that Mercury is making a trine to Saturn. And I think with this trine to Saturn, if you try to avoid things, then that is quite unsatisfactory. You might, for example, do your best to avoid money matters, or perhaps things relating to your work or your business. You might make an effort, tell yourself that it's the weekend, but the more you try to avoid it, maybe the more problematic it becomes, and perhaps even the more obsessive you become. But on the other hand, with this Mercury trine Saturn, if you're prepared to just take things head on, perhaps ignore the fact that it's a weekend and say, hold on, there's something that needs to be sorted out, there's something that you need to think about, then with that Mercury trine Saturn, it is a different picture. You'll be able to make sense of things very quickly, and when you are addressing the problem starts to resolve, or even if it doesn't resolve, you start to be aware of what actually needs to be done. So it's probably a good idea this weekend, particularly on Saturday and perhaps early on Sunday, to deal with things head on, and not to run away, and just to be realistic. And by doing that, you're also going to be sort of more relaxed. Now, there are some other aspects to consider. I mean, that Mercury opposition Pluto, I think, is something that really needs to be considered. So that there's also Mercury making a trine to Saturn, which I've just been talking about. In one sense, Mercury trine Saturn is about you being really focused on what matters. There's another way of looking at Mercury trine Saturn, and Mercury trine Saturn might say something about relationships and how best to deal with them. And it's an aspect which is about communication and being able to talk things through. And so if you're in a relationship, then, and there are things that, need to be discussed, but you've perhaps been avoiding, then, deal with them head on. And this is especially the case if they are things of a financial or material nature. Money can't be avoided, whatever the situation, and there's always a financial dimension, and sometimes that financial dimension is sort of hidden or sort of brushed under the carpet, especially with Mercury opposition Pluto. Pluto does like to hide things, but just because something is hidden doesn't mean that it's gone away. Now, on Sunday, the moon does change sign. It moves out of Leo and it moves into Virgo, and probably that's quite a good thing. Moon moving into Virgo. Moon works relatively well in Virgo. I mean, the moon rules the earth signs by night, so that's one reason why the moon works well in Virgo, especially during the hours of darkness. Additionally, from a Cancer perspective, Moon in Virgo is the third house from Cancer. So you could say that the Moon joys in the third house. So, it's a time when you can sort of, move from place to place. I think you're going to find your voice. It could be quite difficult to find your voice, especially on Saturday. But on Sunday, you will start to be able to, say what's on your mind, but in a way that is smooth, and there isn't necessarily going to be much resistance. And the moon does actually start making a conjunction to Mars, and I think that moon conjunct Mars is going to be exact on Monday, but you'll probably be starting to feel its impact by late on Sunday. And so with moon conjunct Mars, you can actually speak what's on your mind, with conviction, and I think that people will notice you, and and in most cases your will should prevail. So if there's something that needs to be said, well, then now might be a great time to say it, because there won't be much resistance. And so, overall, this weekend is okay. It's not necessarily very relaxing, and there are things that you might be concerned about. But if you address these concerns directly, I think that is the best approach. And I think by the end of a weekend, you might feel that you've done a good job. It was challenging, but at the same time, you were able to cope with these challenges and really make the most of things. Leo, there is activity in your sign. It's not just the fact that the moon is moving through Leo, but also we have an opposition aspect between Mercury and Pluto. So Mercury is moving through Leo, your sign, and it's making an opposition to Pluto. And so this opposition, which is essentially across the main axis of your solar chart, could be quite major. It could say something about you and other people. And when you think about Pluto, you often think about power, and Pluto is in your opposite sign of Aquarius, and words matter, and the way words are used could say something about your peace of mind. Now, with Mercury moving through Leo, you probably do have quite a lot to say. And you might think that now might be the time to do it, especially with the moon in Leo as well. On the other hand, Mercury is opposition Pluto, and Pluto can hide things. That's what Pluto sometimes wants to do, and it can also be quite an overwhelming influence. And so there may be moments over the weekend where you feel that there are things to say, things that need to be communicated, but you hold back because you're worried. You don't know what's going to happen, and you just might be afraid of, for example, another person's reaction. And the key thing here is perhaps not to over-dramatize it. So Mercury, yes, it does make an opposition to Pluto, but Mercury is also making us trine to Saturn. And with this trine to Saturn, perhaps it's just a signal that you need to take things slowly. So if you've got something to say, it doesn't have to be all said in sort of one blast. You can build things up, one fact at a time. So you say something small, you don't use many words, and you just build it up, and you use your intuition to get your timing right. There's always the right time to say something, and I think Leo, you can actually work out when that time arrives. So it's a weekend that when you have to think about your own power, and sometimes you do have to assert yourself, and sometimes you have to assert yourself verbally, and also there might be moments of excitement. The moon is, after all, making a square to Uranus. Now, this moon square Uranus is possibly not something that should be missed, because Uranus is about to go into Gemini, and okay, it will go back into Taurus, later in the year. I mean, Uranus goes into Gemini on July the 7th, and it does go back into Taurus in November. So there's a great chunk of time when it is out of this very important sign, Taurus, because Taurus is an important sign in the Leo chart. And so with Uranus moving through Taurus, and remember Uranus has been moving through Taurus around 7 years or something like that, it should have been a time, Leo, when you had real ideas about what you could do, what might be possible, and so there should really also be a feeling of excitement that you can make radical changes. But now Uranus moving into Gemini, about to move into Gemini, it might feel that you've missed the moment, or this is as good as it gets, this is as dramatic as it gets. And so with this moon square Uranus, this really is the last square between Moon in Leo and Uranus in Taurus before Uranus changes sign. The next time Moon makes a square to Uranus, Uranus won't be in Gemini won't be in Taurus anymore. So perhaps part of what you're experiencing is a tension here, because something needs to be expressed, not necessarily to other people, but to yourself. And it's about your unique contribution and being aware of what it is that makes you different, and also be aware of something you can do which really is dramatic, which really defines your individuality. So it could be with this moon square Uranus that you feel, particularly at the beginning of a weekend, that really something has to be done and you have to make a decision. So don't miss it. And perhaps on Saturday, think about the future. Think about the last 7 years. What have you achieved? What have you not achieved? What is there left to do? And hopefully, Leo, you'll have some kind of inspiration to carry you forward. Until Uranus changes sign on July the 7th. Virgo, the big aspect this weekend is an opposition between Mercury and Pluto, and inevitably this aspect must have an impact on you because Mercury is your ruler. And so with Mercury opposition Pluto, Virgo, you should have a real awareness of your own power, what you can do. And sometimes Virgos can be modest, or they might assume that it's a difficult world, there's a limit to what you can do. But Mercury opposition Pluto is a reminder of what you could do if you gave yourself a chance. But Mercury opposition Pluto has another side to it. You're also aware of everything holding you back, everything stopping you achieving whatever it is you want to achieve. And yet sometimes you might think that there's just so much to do, so much to organize, that you're never going to get anywhere, and it can be just difficult to sort of act as an individual. But you shouldn't have this view. It's good to see the problem. It's good to see what might be holding you back, but you've also got to see the solution. And I think that this Mercury opposition Pluto, really can be quite challenging, but challenging in a good sense. And it's not that you have to necessarily do anything in a concrete way, but it's perhaps more about your private realizations. Or else you might realize that there are things you can do on your own that don't necessarily need anyone else's help. And it's not just the fact that Mercury is making an opposition to Pluto. It's also the fact that Mercury is making a trine to Saturn and a trine to Neptune. And that Mercury trine Saturn is about you, and it's about you doing things in your own way, at your own pace, and probably not getting much attention, but also covering a lot of ground. So, once you start doing something, once you start getting into the organizing principle, then things really start to happen. And then Mercury makes a trine to Neptune, and you then get some insights about where it's all going. And it's not just about the material world. It might also be with Mercury trine Neptune that you're in contact with something, and that something might be some aspect of yourself, some aspect of your unconscious, and there is a line of communication, and you're actually doing the right thing, and you just know that you're doing the right thing, and you don't have to be told, you don't have to have faith. It's just an absolute knowledge that that it's okay. And so, Virgo, it's important that you try to have as much confidence as possible. And there can be a situation where you're too modest, where you underestimate what you can actually achieve. Now, on Sunday, the moon does change sign. It changes sign from Leo into Virgo, and moon moves into Virgo, and then it starts making a conjunction to Mars, and so that conjunction to Mars, I think, is exact on Monday. But we know with the moon moving into Virgo, perhaps things really start to come together. So the weekend could start as being quite confusing and when you've been uncertain, but you needed to have that basic knowledge that you're on the right track in your own way. But it was still difficult. But then by the end of a weekend, things do come together, and you actually start to realize what you can do, what you can achieve. And of course, with that moon starting to make a conjunction to Mars, then that suggests to me that you can really start to assert yourself. And as you move into Monday, then Virgo, I think you become someone who is actually very powerful. So I think next week could really start on quite a fortunate note. Libra, it's a weekend where you can largely do as you please. I don't think that there's going to be a great deal of pressure on you, and you can move from one place to another, one social scene to another. In fact, I think you can enjoy the company of lots of different people, and that's just going to be something about you that's just naturally very sociable. I mean, it's not necessarily that you're going to be setting the house on fire, but in a social sense. But still, you can move to the centre of things, and also you'll be quite versatile. Perhaps more versatile than you've been for the last few weeks. The last couple of weeks, you may have found it difficult to make rapid change, but you will be more versatile than usual. But don't go everywhere. Don't assume that everything is fine. There is some danger, Libra, that in looking for new scenes, you get involved in something that could be unsavory. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Or you might find yourself attracted to something which is perhaps has a darkness to it. And okay, you might see the advantage there, and it could be from a selfish perspective that maybe you could benefit from someone's misfortune. So whatever it is, something going wrong somewhere, and you're there, and you kind of know what to do. You kind of have a familiarity with it. Yeah, maybe there's a benefit there, but I think there's also a danger. And so probably in most cases, Libra, you should try to be cautious. Just because something seems exciting doesn't mean that you should necessarily pursue it with everything you've got. And maybe what you should be looking for, at least with other people, is reliability. I mean, Mercury is making a trine to Saturn, and so when you're talking to people, Mercury is a communication planet after all. When you're talking to people, do look for reliability. Look for evidence of reliability, and you also look for evidence of the opposite. I think that a lot of people are going to be honest about who they are and what they're interested in. And if someone is unreliable or even dangerous, I think they will indicate this, with what they say, what they hint at. And so perhaps through communication, you can actually reach a real understanding, of what people are like, and whether or not they can be trusted. And the end of a weekend, the moon changes sign. Moon moves out of Leo into Virgo, and so you might find that things do start to slow down. So by Sunday evening, you feel that you've done your bit. there's nothing more that you want to do. And this continues into Monday, because on Monday the moon will be in Virgo. So whatever you're thinking about, with Monday, when you're looking ahead, perhaps you shouldn't think that you're going to actually achieve very much. And so perhaps it should be a long weekend. Okay, it doesn't literally have to be a long weekend, but on Monday, Monday seems to be a sort of a continuation of Sunday, and so don't assume that you're going to be able to do huge amount of stuff at the beginning of a weekend, because I don't think you'll be in the mood, and you might not have the opportunity, and if anything does happen, it may be down to other people, other parties, to take the initiative. Scorpio, you're ready to make an impact. You're still ready to make an impact. And you might say that, this weekend, is particularly Saturday, is kind of more of the same. It's just a continuation of the week. So I don't think that there is a natural distinction between Friday and Saturday. The moon's continuing to move through Leo. I think that you continue to have particular ambitions, things you want to do, and maybe it's now more intense because we've now got Mercury in Leo. Mercury is in an important part of your chart, and you're thinking about the future, and you're thinking about what hasn't been done, and because of that, it might actually be quite hard to relax. And so perhaps you shouldn't try to relax if it's hard to relax. And so on Saturday, it just could be, just seeing things through. And it's possible that people like friends and family try to suggest that you do something else, that you think about something else. And you can try to enjoy yourself. You can try to do something fun, but it's not going to feel natural. And you're always going to be thinking that maybe you should be doing something else. And one aspect we do have over the weekend is an opposition aspect between Mercury and Pluto. I do think that this opposition really does matter. And with this opposition, you can, if you want, be really very powerful, and you can express your being in a way that is really difficult to avoid. People will notice you, and so if you want to get anyone's attention, for whatever reason, you really can. And it might be, Scorpio, that you feel that some things haven't been taken seriously enough. Other people, perhaps your family, haven't been taking something seriously, and you want to bring it out into the open and create a sense of gravitas. And so I think that is really something you can do. And at the end of a weekend, the moon does change sign. The moon does sort of move out of Leo into Virgo. So there is a change of emphasis, and you might be somewhat less focused on the specifics of your precise ambitions, and instead there might be room for relaxation. There might be room for example, gentle socializing. But when the moon moves into Virgo, it does make a conjunction to Mars. And so as you move into Monday, moon with this conjunction to Mars could certainly make you quite dynamic. And I think that socially you can be dynamic, and you'll want to take the lead. And you might still think that socializing for the sake of socializing is a waste of time. It all has to have a purpose. And also with moon conjunct Mars, there may be an impatience coming in as you move from Sunday into Monday. That something has to be, not just something has to be done, but you have to be thinking about the future. And if there's no purpose to something, what is the point? You don't want to waste time, because there is a limited amount of time out there. And so you might be quite a difficult person to deal with, because you will give the impression that you're in a hurry. And that's okay, because there's no harm in being in a hurry. And, additionally, it's a time, Scorpio, when, you can really show everyone what you can do. It's not a time for hiding. Whether it's Saturday or Sunday or into Monday, things have to be brought out into the open. And people need to know who they are dealing with. And yeah, the more open you are, the more honest you are. Maybe you have to be rather blunt. But yeah, the better. Just be honest, be open, and don't worry too much about hurting anyone's feelings. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, there is stuff going on in fire signs. Well, that was yesterday, and there was on Friday. It certainly is as the weekend gets underway. Got the moon in Leo, we've got Mercury in Leo, we've got Saturn in Neptune in Aries, and so you kind of feel at home. But this is a time when you can be a Sagittarius. That's always important, to just be a Sagittarius and to be yourself, not have to apologize. And if you want to get something off the ground this weekend, you've got ideas, you've got plans, then I think that really you should be able to proceed. And it's important that you don't ask too many questions, and also that you don't let other people ask too many questions. Sometimes it's just about having an idea, a big idea, and yeah, you can always question this idea. You can always come up with reasons why this idea might not work, but is it useful? Probably not. So if you have something that you want to get into, you want to involve yourself with, I think that you should go with it, and just be as adventurous as possible. And just because you're adventurous doesn't mean that you're ill-disciplined. Mercury is making a trine to Saturn, and so Mercury trine Saturn may allow you to have new ideas, new concepts, and find ways of actually making them concrete. And you can do this in a way that is really very powerful, and I think that people are going to appreciate the real sort of power of your personality, and you will give the impression that you are going somewhere, but perhaps you are on a mission. And on Sunday, the moon changes sign. The moon moves from Leo to Virgo, and when the moon moves into Virgo, it does start making a conjunction to Mars. And this sign change could actually make you more focused. You'll start to realize there are things you want, and you don't want to hang around. And the moon will continue moving through Virgo into next week. It'll be moving through into Virgo certainly on Monday, and it will be making that conjunction to Mars. And so really prepare yourself, and don't scatter your energies. That would be unnecessary. And decide what is important, and also decide what is worth fighting for. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, there is an opposition aspect between Mercury and Pluto, and that might say something about other people and perhaps the important people in your life. Mercury opposition Pluto can indicate a person who is holding something back. They might have powerful thoughts and feelings, but they're not revealing them. That's one interpretation of it. It could also represent a person who is being manipulative. They're saying things in a clever way, and they're trying to draw you into something. So when dealing with people, particularly if you know them well, if they're close to you, do look very carefully at the way they are communicating and what they're saying, what they're not saying, and ask yourself, what are they trying to achieve, and to what extent are they able to really make an impact on you? I mean, you might think that you're in full control, but that's not necessarily the case if you're getting really close to someone, and someone might be being clever with words. That's a possibility. That's one interpretation of Mercury opposition Pluto. But another interpretation is someone who just can't get the words out because they're afraid of something, or they're just keeping something to themselves for their own reasons. So perhaps that's something you should try to understand if you are dealing with people over the weekend, and particularly if those people are close to you, perhaps partners, spouses, those kinds of people that really matter to you. Capricorn, the weekend is possibly quite serious, especially on Saturday, and perhaps for a lot of Sunday, but particularly on Saturday. And you're aware that things are not necessarily straightforward, and you have to really pay attention to what's going on, and you also have to pay attention to things on an emotional level. And so do make an effort to understand what is going on emotionally, and what people are thinking, what people are feeling, and do assume that people are complicated. I'm not saying everyone is complicated, but right now, as far as you're concerned, there are complications which just could make things difficult, and you shouldn't necessarily take what anyone says at face value. People might say all sorts of things, but do they necessarily mean it? And it's possible that there are people that they want to say something, they want to be honest, but they can't, and so they just say what's easy to say, and they leave the difficult stuff until later. And perhaps also there's pressure on you to make assumptions and to be a mind reader. Now, you can't be a mind reader, but some people almost expect it of you. And so perhaps you should be open-minded and not take what people say and promise at face value. And so if you assume that everything is complicated, then you could say that things will actually become easier. And also in that way, with that assumption, you're putting yourself in a stronger position, and you may have a chance to start to exercise control. It might not be immediately easy, but I think perhaps if you don't understand what other people want, then you just instead need to make it clear what you want. And from a verbal perspective, Capricorn, I think you're going to be very good at making an impression. You can actually be quite shocking in terms of what you say. And perhaps if people aren't being honest and aren't being open, one way to force them to be open is to say things which are dramatic, because that can be the only time that people respond in an authentic way. When you just force them to say, well, hold on, this is a serious situation. Maybe Capricorn has done something dramatic, is suggesting something dramatic. We can't not reveal what's on our mind now. We have to say something, because otherwise Capricorn is going to steamroller us. So there is a way, Capricorn, in which you can set the pace, and perhaps you should have a sense of the dramatic. Now, I think probably the weekend gets easier as it progresses, and one reason for that is the moon changes sign. The moon moves out of Leo and it moves into Virgo, and when it moves into Virgo, it starts making a conjunction to Mars, and so and also because Virgo is an Earth sign, and so with the moon moving into Virgo, there's more flexibility on your part, and also perhaps other people are not quite so difficult, and it's going to be easier for you to sort of see beyond the complexities of other people and their issues and their games, and you can start to get a bigger picture, the big picture indeed. And also with moon moving towards a conjunction of Mars, it's just going to be easier for you to assert yourself, and easier for you to make it clear who you are and what you want. Aquarius, it's a weekend that, for many people, regardless of their sign, is not necessarily going to be easy. There are just things that have to be dealt with, and one thing one has to deal with is the complexities of human nature. And again, it's not just about you, but we've got an opposition between Mercury and Pluto, and it just might occur to you, what people are like, and when you look at what people are doing, what people are saying, it's not easy, and you realize that everyone has got their own view and their own set of priorities, and people are just not prepared to give much ground, and actually you're not prepared to give much ground either. And so what do you do? I think the best you can do is simply try to understand what is going on, and talk to people, and let them talk to you, and try to understand what they're trying to say. And additionally, Aquarius, be aware of other people's fragility, especially as far as their egos are concerned. Some people do have fragile egos at the moment, and they want to be noticed, they want to be taken seriously, but they feel that they're all at sea, and they're not getting enough recognition. And perhaps you can help. I mean, you're not the kind of person that just flatters people for the sake of it. As far as you're concerned, what's the point? And there's also an honesty issue. But maybe today, a small amount of flattery could be helpful. And it doesn't have to be much flattery. Just saying something nice about someone, even if you don't necessarily mean it, it can just go a long way. And also, Aquarius, be aware of your unconscious need for attention, because there is this polarity between Aquarius and Leo. Aquarius has a reputation for being a sign that is quite sort of objective and individualistic, but when you're looking at astrology, you always think about the opposite sign, and the opposite sign is often quite unconscious. And so with the moon in Leo, it may be that at some level you are looking for attention, and perhaps you feel you're not getting enough attention, and you haven't fully recognized this. And it's enough to recognize, if you can recognize it, that you need to be taken more seriously, then you don't have to make a big fuss about it. You don't have to feel that other people are doing you a great injury by ignoring you. And especially today, especially this weekend, when you can make a big impression if you want to. If you really want to, you can really get everyone to notice you. And it might be about the things you say. Some people are very focused on one way of looking at the world, and they're getting comfortable with it. And you could say the last thing that anyone expects, and in the process, you could cause a lot of upset, and you could certainly get attention. So if you feel the temptation to sort of shake things up, ask yourself why you're doing it. Is it because something really needs to be shaken up? Or is it just because actually you're being ignored, or you're not getting enough attention, and you feel that you need to change things? So, do be emotionally aware, and be aware of other people's frailties, but also be aware of your own frailty. And perhaps you need to be particularly aware of your own inner Leo, trying to get out, trying to be admired and appreciated. And don't worry, that admiration and appreciation will come your way, just provided that you are sincere and authentic. Pisces, this weekend, it might feel as if there's just stuff that is not done properly, you can see that it's not done properly. You're very aware of your own mistakes and also other people's mistakes. And that is a good thing. If something has been sort of left over from earlier in the week, it's kind of half finished, someone's just left something in a state of disarray, perhaps it was you that has left something in a state of disarray, this weekend you can actually start to do something about it. And so do look around you, notice things. Sometimes you don't notice things, you just sort of look the other way, or you're distracted, but really try to see everything. And if you see everything, then you can rapidly sort things out. And so it can be a useful weekend where you can really wrap things up, and unfinished business can be resolved, and it's something that you can actually do with other people's help. It's not just you on your own having to pick through the wreckage. I mean, wreckage might be a rather strong word, but there will be help if you explain to other people what the situation is like and what needs to be done. I do think that you'll get a sympathetic response. And also, it does seem that some people really are very responsible. I think you can actually be responsible, but other people can be as well if you give them a chance. So don't assume that other people aren't prepared to do anything, or that they're lazy. They're not. They just perhaps have to be reminded of what needs to be done. And so in a gentle way, Pisces, you can actually be quite an effective taskmaster. Something needs to be done. You tell people it needs to be done. They understand what you're saying, and things do come together. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, you might start the weekend thinking that things aren't great. You might have your doubts about certain people, but in fact, the people that matter right now are going to be very diligent and responsible, again, if you give them a chance. And I think that it is a weekend where it's okay to trust people, especially if someone has been trustworthy in the past, or relatively trustworthy. If they haven't let you down in the past, they're not going to let you down again. And so partners, close friends, they're going to be on your side, and they're going to be there for you if you give them the chance. And those are my forecasts for the weekend, my 12 forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to consider the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 39, obstruction. And this hexagram doesn't move. There are no moving lines. And this kind of fits in with the astrology. So if you've been listening to my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend, I haven't been entirely positive. I don't think there's any of the 12 signs that I've been completely over the moon about. And this just reflects maybe that it is a weekend that not a great deal is going on. There is this Mercury, this opposition between Mercury and Pluto, which could be troublesome, and perhaps it's going to be difficult for us to express ourselves, or there might be a lot of fear and concern, and it's all rather unsatisfactory. And this hexagram obstruction just sums it all up. It's a weekend, we might have plans, we might be thinking that we're going to move forward, but we can't move forward. We could try, but we're going to get stuck. That's what this hexagram is about. And it doesn't have any moving lines. So the fact there are no moving lines indicates that we're not necessarily dealing with anything disastrous. We're not dealing with anything disastrous. It's instead is about stagnation. it's just not working. And we might feel that we're so close to finishing something, so close, because the nuclear hexagram, by the way, of obstruction is hexagram 64, which is before completion. So before completion is a situation where we're not quite finished. We're nearly there. We've nearly reached the far bank of a river, but we haven't reached it yet, and there's still plenty of things that can go wrong. And so that sort of links back with obstruction. So obstruction means that we can't go forward. We could go back if we wanted to. We could maybe stay where we are, and that's probably where we're going to end up. We've gone as far as we can. We're stuck. Okay, we could try to go forward, but I don't think that we'd have much success. So really, I don't think there's anything more to say. I think it's going to be quite possibly quite a frustrating weekend. And so if you've got big plans for the weekend, I'm not saying that you should just give up on them. And I certainly don't want to create self-fulfilling prophecies. After all, I might be wrong. And some people inevitably are going to have great weekends. But it does seem to me, you watching this video indicates that at some level that it's not going to be a great weekend, and so don't push it, and certainly don't expect to expect big things, and and don't be too proud. If something is not working, then it may be best to just retreat, or you could just stay where you are and wait for the situation to resolve. And perhaps you're in the middle of something, or even coming to the end of something, but you've just hit a hurdle, and rather than just go on, it's like when you're trying to build something, whether it's, I don't know, perhaps a model plane, or perhaps you're trying to put together something from IKEA. You reach a hurdle, and you're tempted to just go on to try something, but if you just do it without thinking, you're just going to break something. You're going to force it. You're going to force something in, and it's just going to be a big mess. And it's best to just step back, perhaps look at another YouTube video, get some help, get some advice, and by the beginning of next week, things will change, because this I Ching only covers the weekend. By Monday, things are going to be different. So don't be in too much of a hurry, and don't believe that things are going to be resolved immediately, even if you feel that you're very close to the end. And that might be what it's about. You just hitting a problem when you can just see the far bank, but you're not there yet. And if you try to force it, then you might never get to the far bank. So that's I Ching. And now I want to finish by looking at Zohran Mamdani, who has just won the Democratic primary. And there's a lot of excitement about it. Sorry, the Democratic primary for the mayor of New York. And, the great thing about Zohran Mamdani is we do have a time of birth. I didn't think there was going to be a time of birth, but actually there is. And so because there's a time of birth, we can say, so much more about him. So here is let's get his chart. So here is Zohran Mamdani's chart. I got this from Astro.com, and it has an A rating. I think A rating means it's from memory. I think he was asked. So 1:15 a.m. He's born in Kampala. So as you can see, he is young. He's 33. He's an assemblyman from a New York assemblyman who has just won the Democratic primary to be, for the mayoral election. And he describes himself as a democratic socialist. And he has ideas about reducing people's costs, rent control, maybe even New York, the city, creating its own grocery shops. And so, he puts himself out as a sort of a man, for the people. And of course, he, not surprisingly, being a democratic socialist, he is, a supporter of Palestine. Of course, that sort of what's going on in Palestine, and sort of a supporter of the Palestinian rights, quite a vocal supporter. And he had this very successful campaign using social media, using, I think, things like TikTok, and I think that he himself has created music, and so he was born in Uganda. I believe he is not eligible to be U.S. president. I think he's a U.S. citizen. He is a U.S. citizen now, but I think that to be a U.S. president, that does relate to would relate to the citizenship of his parents and when they were citizens and so on. But I mean, I may be wrong, but as far as I can see, he can never be U.S. president. So he's not going to be the new Barack Obama or anything like that. I think that he is a Muslim. I think he's a Shiite Muslim, not a Sunni Muslim, and so it's not surprising, given that profile, that people on the right are very concerned about this. Although some, of course, are seeing it as something that might work in the in the Republican Party's favor. You put a supposedly far left person as mayor of New York, and that perhaps it won't work out very well once he actually has to deal with the responsibilities of mayor of New York. But I can speculate, and this is not a politics channel; it's an astrology channel, and I'm not going to express any opinion on Zohran Mamdani. So, as far as his horoscope is concerned, he has his sun in Libra, and having one's sun in Libra can be good for being a politician. I mean, there are some very effective politicians with the sun in Libra. For example, we can think of Margaret Thatcher, we can think of Putin, we can think of Berlusconi, David Cameron, the British Prime Minister. He was a Libran. AOC, she's a Libran, and from a political view, Zohran Mamdani is probably quite aligned to AOC's policies. And of course, she's a New York Congresswoman in federal Congress, who of course has huge profile, and it's kind of likely that Zohran Mamdani is going to have a major profile, over the next few years if he gets elected in the general election. So he's won the primary, but we've got a general election coming up on November the 4th. So there is that question: will he win? But Polymarkets, I think, gives him a 74% chance of winning. And as I would look at his chart, I think we can see that right now things are working quite well for him. And so Libra, well, Kamala Harris also is a Libran. And of course, as a presidential candidate, she was a disaster. It's kind of mystery how she managed to get so far in her political career. But I think that she had particular problems. Kamala Harris didn't help that Kamala Harris was born exactly on a full moon, exactly on a full moon. Not like Donald Trump's full moon was quite close, but Kamala Harris's full moon was exact. But there were other reasons why Kamala Harris was such a failure as a presidential candidate. But looking at Zohran Mamdani, we do notice other things aside from his sun in Libra. I don't think the sun in Libra is necessarily the thing that matters, although notice he's got the moon in Aquarius. So moon in Aquarius making a trine to the sun in Libra. It's always good to have a sun moon trine. It is healthy. It's about the life principle. If you've got that sun moon trine, you'll certainly survive, or you've got a good chance of surviving childbirth or the early years, according to Ptolemy. So Ptolemy, when talking about the sun and the moon, said that if someone is born with the sun and moon in a favourable relationship, they've got a good chance of getting beyond infancy. But it is all about life, and it is certainly a fortunate aspect. And additionally, he's got Venus Jupiter in Virgo, a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter in Virgo, and that raises some questions, because Jupiter is in its detriment in Virgo. Venus is fallen in Virgo, so by sign and exaltation, or the opposite of exaltation, that's a fall, Venus and Jupiter are not particularly well placed, at least in Western astrology. The Vedic picture is different, as I will be explaining later on. But that Venus Jupiter in Virgo indicates to me that there is a self-interest here. I don't think that he is just all about making the world a better place. He is potentially, quite a ruthless operator who actually knows what he's doing, and one shouldn't think that it's just all sweetness and light. But still, if you've got Venus-Jupiter conjunction, then it has its own luck to it, and Venus and Jupiter are the benefics. When they're in conjunction, you can have a fortunate life. And additionally, he has got Neptune in Capricorn. Now, I mentioned that Neptune might not work very well in Capricorn, and I did get a comment asking, well, why is that? I forgot to reply to that comment, but what's the problem with Neptune in Capricorn? Well, there isn't a problem with Neptune in Capricorn if you want to be successful. But for Neptunian things, Neptune in Capricorn can be quite manipulative. I mean, as a generation, and of course it's really impossible to make generalizations about a generation as far as individuals. I mean, sure, lots of you watching have Neptune in Capricorn, but Neptune in Capricorn, Neptune is about just dissolving into something. It's very sort of spiritual, and one just wants to become part of the whole. Yet Capricorn is all about self-interest. It can be about money, and it can be about using the fact that people are dissolving into the whole, perhaps dissolving into your campaign and becoming part of your campaign, as a way of boosting your self-interest. I think with that's a generation of singers like Taylor Swift. I think Lady Gaga, she's got Neptune in Capricorn. That's all you need to know, really. You don't actually have to look at the rest of their horoscope. They're successful. They've got Neptune in Capricorn. They're just leveraging the collective. And that can be how Neptune in Capricorn works, especially if you are a famous person, if you're one of the actors rather one of the people who is pushing a product, not the person who is buying the product. But if you're pushing a product, you've got Neptune in Capricorn. You can leverage the collective for your own benefits, and so that might be how Neptune in Capricorn is working, especially as he's also got Jupiter and Venus, these two very pleasant planets, but one in its detriment and one in its fall. Interestingly, he's got Neptune conjunct true black moon Lilith, and so Neptune is, perhaps what people are dissolving into, and you could think about Palestine, some other cause, and it's true black moon Lilith, and there is perhaps a darkness to that generation in terms of dealing with dark forces. Now, that might be a good or a bad thing. I don't mean that to say that there's a problem with Zohran Mamdani, but it's perhaps what he's able to play with on a collective level with Neptune on true black moon Lilith. And additionally, he's got very strong Mars. Mars is at 0 degrees Scorpio, and Scorpio, Mars rules Scorpio. He's got Mars on the IC. J.D. Vance also has Mars on the IC in Scorpio, by the way. And so when you see Mars on the IC, you should be asking yourself, what is this person hiding? You know, JD Vance. Just quickly look at JD Vance's chart, just to show you what I mean. See, here's JD Vance's horoscope, and see, JD Vance has Mars exactly on the IC in Scorpio, and so does Zohran Mamdani, and it's a very private placement, Mars in Scorpio, when it's conjunct the IC. I mean, it's a fairly private placement in Mars and Scorpio in general, but you put next to the IC, there is something that is being held back, I do think. And I think the same is true with JD Vance. And, you know, when you get too close to that, then you see a response. You can see real anger. And his Mars in Scorpio is square Saturn, and you know that square Saturn is very close. You know, Mars square Saturn is a person who, despite his relaxed demeanor, his TikTok and social media and all that, he takes life seriously. Things aren't necessarily easy, and it's more than that. This Mars square Saturn is angular, and so Mars is on the IC, Saturn is on the descendant. That is really, really critical, and I just don't think we're seeing it. And it may say something about his career later on. Perhaps we haven't seen the whole process, but on the plus side, Mars square Saturn does take things incredibly seriously, and perhaps he has this sort of inner frustration which is perhaps driving his political career, and it's perhaps just always with him. So I don't think that he's necessarily an especially relaxed person, and so I think that from as a person, I do think he's quite complicated. But he also had Mercury conjunct Mars. Mercury conjunct Mars might be on the IC, but it's angular. Clearly, he is someone who is very effective. He's a very effective communicator, can be a very effective orator. So those are a few things about his Western chart, and additionally, there is his Jupiter midpoint tree. I won't go into the 90-degree dial, but he does have Jupiter on the Mercury-Uranus midpoint, and so Jupiter, if you're a politician, can be a very important planet. And so if you've got Jupiter on the Mercury-Uranus midpoint, that does show really you are able to communicate. You've got a message that you really want to reveal. So what is happening to Zohran Mamdani at the moment? So as far as his transits are concerned, this is a chart when I believe Cuomo, one of his rivals, who had been the former governor of New York, was also standing to be mayor. This is when Cuomo conceded, and I think it was at 11 p.m. on Tuesday, June the 24th. So what was happening to Zohran Mamdani when Cuomo conceded? Now, there was a Sun-Jupiter conjunction earlier in the week. In fact, there was a Sun-Jupiter conjunction on sort of Monday, Tuesday, at the beginning of the week, at the time of the primary, and when the primary results were coming out, you see Sun was at 3 degrees 50 Cancer, Jupiter was at 329 Cancer, so very close. And see, that Sun-Jupiter conjunction was basically making an exact trine to his Mercury, and making a sextile to his midheaven, and kind of making a trine to his Mars. So this is an example of a Jupiter trine really working. Now, I'm a bit suspicious of Jupiter trines because in my experience of astrology, they often just don't work. They're incredibly disappointing. And the message with Jupiter transits, particularly a Jupiter trine, is you've got to work really hard to get the result. But this is what he did. He gave it everything, this campaign, to win the Democratic primary to be New York mayor. And so this is an example of what you need to do when Jupiter is making a trine to an important aspect in your chart. And so Jupiter trine Mercury, literally, good news. You've won. Cuomo's conceded. And so that's a good example of astrology working. And I think that if you had looked at his chart just on the basis of transits, you would have noticed this, and this might have been an example where a relative beginner in astrology might have suggested that he was going to do well in this election. And then there's the solar returns. And so remember, he was born in Kampala. And when I do my solar returns, I like to use the place where someone is born. I don't, by and large, use the place where someone is when they have their birthday. So here is Mamdani's solar return set for Kampala. And what's kind of interesting about this chart is that he's got that at the time of his solar return, 1 degree Leo was rising. So if you look at his natal chart, he has got 0 Leo rising. So it's actually possible that he's got Cancer rising. I mean, 1:15 a.m. is a very round time. If he'd been born a few seconds earlier, he would have had Cancer rising. I suspect, from what I know of him, what I can see of him, that it is Leo rising, but we don't know for sure. But if we take his ascendant at 0 degrees Leo and his midheaven at 4 degrees 21, we can see that at the time of his solar return, we get a repeated theme. That the ascendant is the same as the natal ascendant, and likewise with the midheaven. So you could say that that is quite fortunate, or no, not necessarily fortunate, but important. I mean, it could have represented something bad, having the birth ascendant repeating at the time of the solar return. But the sun is trine Jupiter. I mean, that would happen wherever one set the solar return to. But it's just a reminder that maybe it's not such a bad time for him. But Pluto is conjunct the conjunct the descendant. So maybe he's got to sort of watch out for his enemies. But overall, it's not that the solar return is good or bad. I think it's just the fact that it's important. I just to look at what that solar return would look like if we had set it for New York, where I assume he was at the time of his last birthday, then we do notice that Pluto does stand out here. So set for New York, Pluto's exactly square the ascendant, and so Pluto has a very 10th house feel to it there, and even at sort of 10th house, exactly on the 10th house cusp. Certainly from the point, if you use equal house systems, you'd see Pluto exactly on the 10th house. And so Pluto square the ascendant sort of represents a dramatic change in his profile for the location where he was. So when I say that you should be looking at solar returns for the place of birth, I'm not saying that is an absolute rule. I think you should probably look at both if you want to be thorough. And so then you've got his solar returns, the solar return coming up. So the the general election, the real election, the final election is November the 4th. So we should perhaps be looking at his solar return for October 2025, his next solar return. So here's his next solar return set for Kampala. And this next solar return has Jupiter exactly on the midheaven. And so Jupiter and Jupiter in Cancer. And so Jupiter in Cancer is, obviously it's exalted in Cancer, it's not retrograde, and then look at his ascendant. He's got 1 degree Scorpio rising, so he's got the kind of the degree of his, close to the degree of his Mercury-Mars conjunction rising, and also he's got there's Mars in Scorpio. So you've got a Mercury-Mars conjunction in Scorpio. He's got a Mercury-Mars conjunction in Scorpio in his natal chart, and it's in the first house, and Jupiter's on the 10th house. So on the basis of that solar return, his next solar return, that suggests to me that he should have a really good chance of winning. I know that the poly markets, the betting markets give him a 74-75% chance of winning. So it's not as if it's anything dramatic that I'm suggesting here. I mean, everyone is expecting him to win, and his solar return set for October 2025 is kind of indicating the same. And we could sort of reset that if we relocate it to New York. It's still pretty good. I mean, Jupiter may not be on the midheaven. Jupiter may not be conjunct the midheaven, but it's conjunct the ascendant instead. And so Mars, midheaven is Aries. If you reset his solar return for New York, and the ruler of Aries is Mars, and yes, Mars is in Scorpio in its own sign. So solar returns do suggest that things are looking good for him, and they will continue to look good for him in the immediate future. Though we should not forget when we look at Zohran Mamdani's chart, he's got a midheaven 4 degrees Taurus, and Saturn's just gone into Aries. I mean, Saturn will go into Aries. Saturn will go into Taurus in the end. And I'm thinking that Saturn moving into Taurus could be a problem. And the reason Saturn going into Taurus could be a problem is because when Saturn moves into Taurus, it will be square his ascendant. And it will be square his Saturn. And it will be opposition his Mars and Mercury. So I know that things are looking pretty good for him at the moment, but Saturn moving into Taurus could be a real problem for him. And by the way, as far as when that happens, Saturn moves into Taurus, well, obviously not immediately. We have to wait, but that takes place, I make it April 2028. So, 3 years' time, maybe he's mayor of New York, but then as soon as Saturn goes into Taurus, things could go wrong for him very quickly. And that is a transit that he's really going to have to think hard about, and how he's going to negotiate it. And now I just want to finish by looking at his Vedic chart. So let's turn to his Vedic chart. Here it is. So his Vedic chart is certainly worth looking at. So from a Vedic view, his sun remains in Libra, because when you cast a Vedic chart, if you use a Lari Ayanamsha, you take around 24 degrees from each of the sign positions. So if he's got his Western, he's got his sun at 24 degrees Libra, then you take off 24 degrees, and so that takes the sun down to 0 degrees 17 Libra. And that 0 degrees Libra is not great. I mean, his sun now is, well, we know it's fallen in the West, and it's in the Western chart. It's also fallen in the East. So his sun could be problematic. And also his Mars goes back into Scorpio. Sorry, it goes back into Libra. So he doesn't have in his East Vedic chart, he doesn't have Mars in Scorpio. He has Mars in Libra, and he's got a Sun Mars conjunction, which might at some stage be a cause for concern. And if you look at his planets from the viewpoint of Shad Bala, then it seems that the strongest planet in his chart is Saturn. So his Saturn, 0 degrees Aquarius Western, that means 6 degrees Capricorn Eastern. So he's got Saturn in the 7th in Capricorn. Now, that Saturn is in a great place, because Saturn in the 7th has Dikbala, which means directional strength. And when Saturn is in the 7th, it works well. And in particular, it allows one to defeat one's enemies, and especially when it's in Capricorn, in its own sign. So this is someone who you don't want to take on. And it doesn't matter how difficult things are, he's really going to be able to look after himself, and perhaps he will have luck on his side. So from a perspective of someone fighting an election, having Saturn in the 7th, and people just carry on and on and on. If you've been watching, Scottish politics, Nicola Sturgeon, I thought she was going to, I thought she was going to go long before she actually went, but she just stayed as First Minister of Scotland. I just didn't understand it. Well, I'm not Scottish. I mean, at least okay, I've got a Scottish name. I might have Scottish origins, but I don't really know what's going on in Scotland. But she had Saturn in the 7th, and it really worked for her. And I think her Saturn was in Aries. It was fallen in the 7th, but it still worked for her. So that is a real plus in his chart, having Saturn in the 7th. And additionally, that Jupiter Venus conjunction, we talked about that Jupiter Venus conjunction in his Western chart, and I had my doubts about it. I think the Jupiter Venus conjunction was fortunate, yes, in his Western chart, simply by virtue of it being a conjunction. But at the same time, I had my doubts about perhaps his ethics, or what was going on deep down. Perhaps he was thinking quite a lot about himself. Well, I suppose he's a politician, isn't he? You wouldn't expect a politician to be completely selfless, but he does have Jupiter. He does have a Jupiter Venus conjunction in his Eastern chart as well, and that Jupiter Venus conjunction is really important, particularly now. So, as far as the Vimshottari Dasha system is concerned, when you divide one's life up into 9 discrete periods, altogether they last for 120 years. In April 2016, he entered his Jupiter Dasha. Now, according to Shad Bala, his Jupiter is one of the strongest planets in his chart. His Saturn is his strongest planet in his chart. The second strongest planet is Jupiter. So it's a strong planet, Jupiter is, and it's made stronger by the fact that it is conjunct Venus. So his Jupiter Dasha started in 2016, and so that's all well and good. And then if you look at the sub-dashas, the dashas and the sub-dashas, his Jupiter major dasha, Venus sub-dasha, started on March the 6th, 2024, last year in March, and it continues until November 2026. So he right now is in his Jupiter major dasha and Venus minor dasha, and that continues beyond the election. Now, that means that if you were looking at his chart at the moment of birth, I think any astrologer would have said that this period, when he's in his Jupiter Mahadasha, Venus Subdasha, this period lasting from April 26, lasting from March 2024 through to November 2026, should in theory be one of the most fortunate periods of his life. Indeed, perhaps the most fortunate period of his life. And so, yeah, this makes me think that, his chances of winning in the general election in November, we already know it's 74%, but just from a Vedic view, things really do look good. His chances of winning probably are much higher than 74%, well, unless there's a catastrophe. So things do look really good for him at the moment, and you can see it from some of his solar returns, but you can certainly see it in his Vedic chart. Now, this Jupiter major dasha, Venus subdasha doesn't go on forever. It will come to an end, and it will come to an end in November 26, and in November 26 he moves into his Jupiter major dasha and his Sun minor dasha. Now that might be a problem. His Sun is weak. His Sun is one of the weaker planets in his chart. We know that he's got Sun in Libra, which is Sun is fallen in Libra, and it's at 0 degrees Libra. So that's a rather difficult placement for the Sun, and the Sun is conjunct Mars. So what I think might happen is that he'll get elected, but he'll hit problems 2027, 2028, and we know Saturn hitting his midheaven in 2028 from a Western point of view, and we know that in 2026, sort of after he's been mayor for about a year, then the difficulties of running the government, running New York, might start to be felt. So he should enjoy his success, make the most of it. But things aren't going to stay like this forever. And I'm particularly concerned about Saturn going into Taurus. The moment Saturn goes into Taurus, Saturn starts to cross his midheaven, squares his Saturn, goes opposition his Mars. That's when I think the problems are going to arise. But right now things certainly look good for him. So that's all I'm going to say on the subject of Zohran Mamdani. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.